I've always been patient, says Robert Bob Miller, the owner of a modest farm. I like the tranquility of country life, the smell of wet soil, and the satisfaction of harvesting what I had planted with my own hands. But some people confuse patience with weakness, and this woman, this creature called Victoria Harrington, she underestimated the wrong man. The neighbor was the kind of person who thought the world revolved around her. Ever since she moved in next door with her attorney husband, Gregory, she seemed determined to test my limits. First, there were the complaints about the smell of manure. Then came the indignation at the sound of the tractor at 6 o'clock in the morning. But the pinnacle of audacity was when she started stealing from my vegetable garden. At first, I thought it was all in my head. A lettuce or two went missing. A few tomatoes disappeared. Nothing too alarming. But as the days went by, the thefts became more brazen. Whole rows of carrots uprooted. Entire rocket stalks decimated. It wasn't a hungry rabbit or a plague. It was human. And worse, it was her. You've got another problem with that Harrington woman, don't you? My neighbor Elijah Washington said one evening, leaning on our shared fence post. At 73, Elijah was as sharp as the day he went to Vietnam, and after returning home had spent 40 years as a botanist at the State University before retiring to the farmland adjacent to mine. How'd you know? I asked, wiping sweat from my brow. Elijah's dark eyes crinkled at the corners. Caught her yesterday morning while I was collecting deuce samples for my research. Walking out of your garden bold as brass, basket full of your heirloom tomatoes. I knew it, I muttered. Those Harringtons have always been takers, Elijah said, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. Victoria's father-in-law tried to seize my land through eminent domain back in '86 for one of his development projects, called the Progress. Only reason he failed was because I had documentation of the rare plant species on my property. I made a point of waking up earlier than usual to catch her in the act, and guess what? I didn't have to wait long. On the very first attempt, there was the distinguished lady sneaking around my flower beds like a skunk in high heels. The sun hadn't even risen, and she was already there, armed with a straw basket and the shiniest face I'd ever seen. I stayed hidden, watching. She picked the vegetables with annoying calm, as if she were shopping in a grocery store. She even stopped to analyze the best tomatoes, as if she was paying for them. The height of impudence came when, after filling her basket, she stopped to take a selfie with a bundle of spinach. I could have come out of hiding right then and there. I could have screamed, called the police, made a fuss, but where's the fun in that? No, I wanted this woman to learn a lesson. Not just about private property, but about messing with the wrong man. That's when the idea came to me, something fiery, overwhelming, a worthy punishment for a garden thief. I wasn't just going to plant lettuce and carrots anymore. Now the garden would have a special guest, ghost peppers. Ghost peppers. Elijah whistled when I shared my plan with him later that day. That's nuclear option territory, Bob. The butt Jalokia measures over 1 million Scoville units. People have been hospitalized for less. She wants to steal? Let her. But this time, she's going to take home something much more than she expected. Elijah frowned, running a weathered hand over his silver-gray hair. I don't know, Bob. Seems risky. What if a child gets hold of them? Or wildlife? There could be unintended consequences. I'll plant them in the back corner, away from everything else, I promised. And I'll put up markers so nobody accidentally grabs one. Nobody except Victoria. Elijah noted with a small smile, despite his concern. Exactly, I confirmed. Elijah considered this for a long moment, then sighed. Well, if you're set on this, at least do it properly. I've got some Carolina Reaper seeds from my university days. Make her really regret her thieving ways. The funniest thing about slackers is that they never imagine it will go wrong. Victoria thought she was the queen of the neighborhood, as if the whole world had been made for her and she was above all rules. Stealing vegetables from my farm? A silly detail. I certainly wanted to share it with her, didn't I? Because that's what goes through people's minds. Everything that exists is rightfully theirs. Well, she had a surprise waiting. I spent days preparing the ground. I placed the ghost peppers well mixed in with the other plants. They're tricky, small, red, pretty. They look innocent, but when you take the first bite, your soul leaves your body for a journey straight to hell. And the best part? These peppers smell sweet when fresh. Nothing that would make anyone suspicious of the atomic bomb they were about to ingest. You sure about this? Elijah asked as we finished planting the final row. Those Harringtons have connections in this county. Gregory's firm represents half the county commission. Let them come, I said with more confidence than I felt. What are they going to do? Admit his wife's been stealing from me for months? I gave a few days. I kept waking up early to see if the creature would return to the scene of the crime. And, of course, it did. It always came back. It arrived early with that ridiculous little basket, took everything it wanted, and left as if it were doing the world a favor. Only this time, my garden was no longer a free buffet. It was a trap. 2 mornings after the last theft, my patience ran out. I needed to see the result of my masterpiece. So I did what any vengeful, bored farmer would do. I waited, and the wait was worth every second. That afternoon, Victoria decided to have a big social event at her house because, of course, she wasn't just a slacker. She was also a show-off. She invited neighbors over for a super organic dinner with ingredients picked by herself. If I had known beforehand, I would have charged for a ticket to attend. What I didn't know, until Elijah called me, his voice unusually urgent, was the guest list for this particular dinner party. "Bob, we may have a problem," he said. "Victoria's dinner tonight? She's hosting Judge Reynolds and Commissioner Davis." "So," I asked, not immediately grasping the significance. "So Reynolds is the circuit court judge who would hear any civil cases in the county, and Davis chairs the agricultural zoning committee. If something goes wrong, it's a little late now," I replied, feeling the first flutter of real concern. "She's already picked the peppers." I managed to stay close by, pretending I was fixing a fence on my side of the property. Her house was full, laughter, music, the delicious smell of food. She was glowing, telling everyone about her vegetable garden, about how producing your own food is a liberating experience, and other nonsense that made me want to roll my eyes until I could see the back of my head. But then came the long-awaited moment. Victoria and her guests sat around the table to enjoy their dinner. I waited. I heard the sounds of the first mouthfuls, the compliments on the explosion of flavor. Someone asked what she had used in the sauce, and that's when it happened. The first scream came quickly. A guy at the table dropped his fork, his eyes wide as if he'd been stabbed in the mouth. He tried to swallow, but his body refused. He coughed, choked, clutched the glass of water like a castaway clutching a buoy. Only water doesn't help. In fact, it only makes it worse. Soon after, another woman began to tear up. Her nose was running, her face as red as a bell pepper. What is it?" She managed to stammer before getting up and running towards the sink. But the best was Victoria. She took a little longer, probably because there was less pepper on her plate, but when it hit. Her mouth dropped open in a funny shape. Her eyes went wide. Her fork stopped midway. Her first reflex was to grab more wine to try to put out the fire, but the alcohol only spread the fire. The second reflex was to spit, but the damage had already been done. Then came despair. She stood up so quickly that the chair toppled backwards. She started shaking her hands as if she were catching fire by telepathy. She ran into the kitchen, ripped the lid off a jug of milk, and poured it straight into her mouth, drowning in her own despair. The guests were in chaos. One man was trying to breathe with his head inside the fridge. Another woman was face down in a bowl of ice. And Victoria, she was leaning against the sink, her face wet with milk, sniffling, her eyes filled with tears and hatred. I stood there on the other side of the fence, pretending I wasn't even paying attention, but inside, I've never had so much fun in my life. Did she want to steal my food? Well, she had a good time, too much. Elijah appeared at my side, binoculars hanging around his neck. "Is that Commissioner Davis being loaded into an ambulance?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. I squinted across the yard. Indeed, paramedics were helping a red-faced man in an expensive suit into the back of an ambulance, an oxygen mask already over his face. "He has a heart condition," Elijah murmured. "This might have gone too far, Bob." A cold feeling spread through my stomach. This wasn't part of the plan. If there's one thing pride won't let you do, it's admit defeat, and Victoria, that woman couldn't accept losing even if her life depended on it. Dinner turned into a survival episode worthy of a Discovery Channel documentary. Guests crawled around her kitchen looking for anything to put out the internal fire, while Victoria seemed in a trance, breathing through her mouth as if the air around her had become lava. The point is that ghost pepper isn't just a sharp blow to the tongue. It has an aftertaste that continues to haunt you for minutes, maybe hours, depending on the dose ingested. And what had Victoria and her friends eaten? A beautiful meal saturated with this natural curse. The tragedy was amplified by the fact that no one there knew exactly what had happened. Because you see, when someone eats something spicy and knows it's spicy, they're already minimally prepared But when the burning takes you by surprise, panic doubles. And that's exactly what happened. The man who had first felt the pepper, the one who had choked and grabbed the glass of water as if it were a lifeboat, was now on the floor, lying on his stomach, trying to catch his breath. Another woman, probably thinking she was having an allergic reaction, started babbling for someone to call an ambulance. But Victoria, she was in full Victoria mode, turning her pain and humiliation into pure rage. Still leaning on the sink with milk dripping down her chin and her eyes watering, she began to mumble something inaudible at first. But soon the muttering turned into a whisper, and the whisper turned into an indignant roar. "I've been poisoned." I almost choked on my own saliva when I heard that. Poisoned? Did this woman really believe that she had been the target of a biological attack? Now, mind you, anyone with an ounce of sense would have stopped, taken a deep breath, and asked themselves, didn't I plant this myself? Didn't I steal an ingredient I didn't know about? But no, right? Because this woman would never accept a mistake. Victoria stood up, turned to the guests, and began a frantic speech typical of someone who is already completely lost in her own lie. Someone did this on purpose. She pointed to the plates, to the leftover food on the table, to the poor souls who were still suffering the effects of the pepper, as if they were living war traumas. The answer that came from one of the guests, a gray-haired man who seemed to be the only rational being in the room, was so logical that it hurt to hear. Weren't you the one who grew those vegetables? Silence. It was one of those cinematic moments where everyone freezes and the protagonist's brain starts to process the mistake she's just made. But Victoria, being Victoria, wasn't just going to swallow that answer and accept reality. No, she needed a culprit, and from the way she turned her head towards my property, I knew exactly who she had chosen to blame. The crazed neighbor shot through the kitchen door, across the lawn, and straight to my fence. "You," she pointed a trembling finger in my direction. Fortunately, I had expected this. This time, I didn't hide. I wanted to see her up close. I wanted to taste her fury in the same way she had tasted my peppers. "Good evening, Victoria," I said, leaning my arms on the fence as if I was about to have a nice chat. "How was dinner?" The woman snorted, her face red, not only from anger, but also from the internal combustion that was still punishing her. "You tampered with the vegetables. You did it on purpose." "What do you mean?" I put on the best innocent face I could manage. "I just grew my own vegetables like I always do." "Don't you always say that you harvest your own food?" Her expression twitched because at that moment she realized how much trouble she was in. If she admitted that she took the vegetables from my garden, she'd be confessing that she'd been stealing from me all along. But if she insisted on the lie that it was all her own produce, she'd have to admit that she planted the peppers herself. Elijah emerged from the shadows, his dignified presence somehow lending gravity to the moment. "Evening, Victoria," he said calmly. "I believe I witnessed you harvesting from this garden early this morning. Would you like me to share that observation with your guests?" Victoria stood there motionless, snorting and trying to find a way out of her own stupidity. I, on the other hand, wasn't going to make it easy. "Look, Victoria," I continued, crossing my arms. "You can choose either of these scenarios. Either you're a garden thief and you got into this on your own, or you're a lousy farmer who doesn't know the difference between lettuce and the devil's pepper. Which do you prefer?" If her eyes could shoot lasers, I'd be charred to a crisp right now. But she didn't answer. She just turned and marched back home, snorting. I walked into my house with a smile from ear to ear, but I knew it wasn't over. This woman wasn't going to swallow that defeat without trying something. The real show was yet to come. "You know this isn't over," Elijah warned as we watched Victoria retreat. "Commissioner Davis is on his way to the hospital. Gregory Harrington isn't going to let this slide." "What can he do?" I asked. "She stole from me. He's one of the most powerful attorneys in the county, Bob. The Harringtons don't play fair, never have. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that people like Victoria never accept that they've lost. They can't just put their heads down and move on. They have to win, even if the battle is already over." And when that woman marched back home, her face still stinging from the pepper and the humiliation, I knew it wouldn't be long before the next attack, and I was right. Sure enough, that evening my phone rang. It was Elijah. "They're mobilizing," he said without preamble. "Gregory's at the county clerk's office filing an emergency injunction against your farm, claiming it's a public health hazard." "That's ridiculous," I sputtered. "What's ridiculous is the speed they're moving. Judge Henshaw signed it an hour ago. They're declaring your entire property a potential contamination zone due to dangerous agricultural products being grown without proper licensing. That's not even a real thing. It is when your father-in-law appointed half the judges in the circuit, Elijah replied grimly. They're coming for your farm, Bob. The next day, I woke up to suspicious noises in my backyard. The clock had barely struck 7 o'clock in the morning, and I could already hear movement near the fence. As someone who had dealt with a vegetable thief before, I got up leisurely, made my coffee, and went to take a look at the crime scene. There she was, Victoria, the owner of the truth, the avenger of her own misfortune, was on my property again. But this time with a cell phone in her hand and an expression of pure conviction. Next to her, 2 policemen were looking at my vegetable garden with a seriousness that I found exaggerated for the case of an alleged agricultural crime. Standing slightly behind them was Gregory Harrington, her husband, in a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than my monthly earnings. He was speaking quietly to a woman in a county health department jacket who was taking samples from my garden and placing them in sealed bags. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, leaning against the fence. "What can I do for you?" One of the policemen, an older man who was clearly tired of life, scratched his head and sighed. "Your name was mentioned in a complaint, sir. The neighbor here claimed that you sabotaged her food and put the health of several people at risk." Of course, the final move. Victoria crossed her arms and flashed that petulant smile of someone who thinks she owns the world. "That's it," she exclaimed, raising her chin as if she were presenting a case before the Supreme Court. "He planted ultra-spicy peppers mixed in with the ordinary vegetables on purpose. He wanted me and my guests to get sick. That's gastronomic terrorism." I wanted to laugh. I swear to God, I did, but I managed to keep my composure. "Look, I'm just a simple farmer," I said, gesturing towards my vegetable garden. "I grow whatever I want on my property. If someone comes in here and decides to steal that, that's their problem, not mine." The second policeman, younger and probably new to the job, raised an eyebrow. "So you admit that the peppers were here?" "Of course," I replied, shrugging. "Ghost peppers. They're great for hot sauce. But I don't know why someone who doesn't live here would be taking my vegetables without permission." Victoria paled. She stepped forward, pointing her finger at me like a witch about to cast a curse. "Don't try to trick me. I know you did it to hurt me. Commissioner Davis had to spend the night in the hospital because of your reckless behavior," Gregory interjected, his voice cold and precise. "His physician has confirmed it was the extreme capsaicin content that triggered his cardiac event." "I don't recall inviting Commissioner Davis to dinner," I replied calmly. "Nor did I serve him anything." At that moment, Elijah appeared at my side, a large envelope in his hand. "Morning, officers. Gregory, Victoria. I see we're having a neighborhood meeting." He nodded to the health department worker. "Ms. Jenkins, isn't it? From the county." The woman looked surprised to be recognized. "Yes, Dr. Washington. I didn't realize you knew each other." "Elijah taught my advanced botany course at State," Ms. Jenkins replied with a smile. "Best professor I ever had." Gregory's expression darkened. This clearly wasn't going according to his plan. "Since we're all here discussing agricultural matters," Elijah continued pleasantly, "I thought you might want to see these." He opened the envelope and pulled out a series of time-stamped photographs. My security camera caught some interesting agricultural activity over the past few weeks. Specifically, Mrs. Harrington here harvesting from Bob's garden without permission on 13 separate occasions. The older policeman looked at her, exhausted. "Mom, so you're admitting here that he only planted the peppers, right?" "Exactly," she spat. "But those peppers were on his property, right?" She blinked hesitantly. "Well, technically yes, but—" "So why were you taking his vegetables?" Silence. Silence, the sweet, sweet sound of stupidity collapsing in real time. Victoria stood there blinking like a fish out of water, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. For the first time since moving to the neighborhood, she had no answer. The young policeman snorted, holding back a chuckle. "Ma'am, the only offense I'm seeing here is trespassing and theft." Victoria freaked out. "What?" She turned to the officers as if she couldn't believe the situation had taken such an unexpected turn. I was the victim here. He planted those peppers on purpose, on his land." The older policeman looked at her with boredom, clearly ready to end the circus. "If you want to continue with this, we can take you to the police station to explain your activity of taking things from his farm without permission. Perhaps we can resolve this without further escalation." Gregory cut in smoothly, his attorney demeanor taking over. My wife clearly made a mistake in taking produce without permission. We're prepared to compensate Mr. Miller appropriately. And the emergency injunction against my farm? I asked pointedly. Gregory had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I'm sure we can revisit that in light of new information. And Commissioner Davis's condition? Elijah asked. Will you be informing him that his distress was caused by stolen goods? Victoria's expression was one of pure defeat. She took a deep breath, her eyes boring into mine. I knew what was going through her head. How had it gone so wrong? How am I, the queen of the neighborhood, coming off as the wrong one? She huffed. She crossed her arms. And with all the class of a spoiled child who has just lost a toy, she let go. It's not over yet. And she turned away, marching back to her house as if she had just been evicted from her own kingdom. Gregory lingered, his expression unreadable. This isn't finished, Miller, he said quietly. Nobody embarrasses my wife and gets away with it. The policeman exchanged glances, then looked at me. The oldest just shook his head. Farmer, keep planning whatever you want, but if I were you, I'd put up an electric fence. I smiled. Oh, you bet. After that, I'm sure my garden will never be visited again. When the policeman left and Victoria locked herself in the house, I took a deep breath and looked at my garden. It was there, intact, free from the touch of other people's fingers. You realize they'll retaliate, Elijah said as we walked the perimeter of my property later that afternoon. Gregory Harrington didn't get where he is by accepting defeat. Let them try. I replied with more confidence than I felt. 3 days later, I discovered what form their revenge would take. A certified letter arrived informing me that a previously dormant clause in the county's agricultural zoning regulations was being reactivated, one requiring farms under 5 acres to undergo monthly inspections and obtain special permits for exotic crop cultivation. They're trying to regulate you out of existence, Elijah observed as we reviewed the documents. These requirements would cost you thousands each year. But Victoria and Gregory had made one critical miscalculation. Their high-handed tactics and abuse of political connections didn't just affect me. They threatened every small farmer in the county. Within a week, the county commission meeting was packed with angry agricultural workers, all demanding to know why the rules were suddenly changing. When Gregory's connection to the sudden regulatory change came to light, along with Commissioner Davis's embarrassing encounter with stolen ghost peppers, public opinion swiftly turned against the Harringtons. The emergency injunction was lifted, the new regulations tabled indefinitely, and Victoria found herself ostracized by the very social circle she'd been so desperate to impress. And what about me? I hadn't just protected my yard. I had one. Life in the countryside has its challenges, but nothing beats the pleasure of seeing a plan work out so well. And the best spice in my garden will always be revenge, well served. 3 months later, a for sale sign appeared in front of the Harrington property. Elijah and I watched from my porch as the moving trucks arrived. Think they learned anything from all this? Elijah asked. I shrugged, taking a sip of the hot sauce weed made from my ghost pepper harvest, now a local sensation at the farmer's market. Probably not. But the next community they terrorize might be less patient than we were. Elijah chuckled. Doubt it. You showed remarkable restraint, all things considered. I smiled, watching Victoria supervise the movers with the same imperious attitude she'd always had. Some people never change. But sometimes, just sometimes, they get exactly what they deserve. Did you like this video? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like.